Hey, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Org podcast series, where we'll take you behind the scenes of how real enterprise projects come to life. I'm your co host, Omar Youssef, and in this series, we will be diving deep into how people, their processes, and decisions they're making across emerging technologies are shaping how the Salesforce ecosystem and the broader cloud world works. Every episode, we'll be bringing on an expert who's been in the trenches, in the weeds of the variety of the different roles, from an architect to an admin to consultants to program leaders and innovators who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in a world where we have AI and modern automations. The goal is very simple. We will be exploring the messy, human, strategic, and technology portions of how delivery operates. While we're not necessarily focused on the configuration and how you add page layouts and fields and all that stuff, we'll be looking at the peripherals of what is really impacting projects and what makes a project successful versus a failure. So if you're somebody who likes to build, who likes to lead, or likes to influence client decisions and projects, well, you found the right podcast. We'll be digging into how you can leverage AI and how you can expand your skill sets to ensure what is being designed, implemented, and documented for your customer is in line. But before we jump in, I want to make a quick shout out to our sponsor, Cluebot, for making this series possible. Cluebot is working to redefine how teams design, analyze, and deliver Salesforce solutions using AI-driven insights. So we're very excited to have their support as we bring these conversations to life. All right, let's get into it. But before we jump in, I will just very quickly introduce my co-speaker, Eric Dreshfield. I personally met Eric for the first time at Tahoe Dreaming. Eric, if I, to best describe him, he connects people, right? He's a blogger, marketer, mentor for those in the Salesforce ecosystem. I personally found that when I met him at Tahoe. He's been in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2009. He has experience across a lot of different industries, very impressive capabilities, whether it's technical, relational, and all of the above. He is also the founder of both Midwest Dreaming as well as Dreamin' in Data, two community-led events and conferences that I've actually personally got to attend Midwest Dreaming in 2025, and it's been an incredible experience to get to know Eric even further. Then he was named as a Salesforce MVP back in 2013, and he's now been inducted in the Salesforce Hall of Fame. He is the Kevin Bacon of the Salesforce ecosystem. Without further ado, excited to have you, Eric, on the podcast. Perhaps we'll let you take it from here and introduce our guest today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Omar. I appreciate you having me on here with you. I'm excited to see what I can learn from our guest today. It's going to be a good chat. So today we have a guest speaker who's been in the industry for quite a long time. She is someone who shaped how many of us think about discovery and delivery, as well as what great consulting should look like. So without any further ado, we're excited to welcome Pei onto the podcast. She is the author of Salesforce Discovery 101, as well as Successful Salesforce Projects 101. And she is the founder of Zenhao, where she trains and coaches consultants to deliver projects with clarity, empathy, and real business impact. She brings over 30 years of CRM experience across Microsoft and Salesforce ecosystems, working as a consultant, a BA, a QA specialist, a project manager, a delivery leader, and a coach for partners like Capgemini, Make Positive, Fontiva, Raise NGO. She's also known for elevating teams through practical hands-on masterclasses focused on communication, questioning, and emotional intelligence. And outside of all of that, she actually volunteers as a Samaritan's listener, which brings a rare depth of empathy to how she approaches clients and teams and her life as well as her work. Pei, we are thrilled to have you on the podcast today, so welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. May I plug my book?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
So this is very quickly. So this was Discovery, which is what you said. This is Successful Salesforce Projects, which is also what you said. But I had a third book out, which is Salesforce Consulting 101. So I'm doing that because my husband says I don't do that enough. So this will make him happy. So thank you very much for having me here.
I need to add that third book to my library.
We'll find it on Amazon then. So to jump in into the conversation, Pei, one of the things that, from my own experience, tends to be a big sticking point in projects, a variety, even small projects to large enterprise implementations, is requirement gathering. And when I talk to people, the concern around project success and deliverability rarely revolves around gathering the right requirements. Curious to get your perspective on where do requirements fall in the value chain of projects, and do they cause failures, and what have you seen in your career?
I think that requirements is actually the most important thing. And I'm not only just talking about projects, but in real life. If you have a romantic partner and you say, what do you want for your birthday? Oh, anything, or just a watch, or a car, and then you can kind of tell how that story is going to unfold because you don't take the time to understand what they actually need. Is it really the car, or is it the fact that they can't get from A to B easily, or they can't see their customer easily, which may not be a car, but it may be, an online Zoom meet and things like that. So it can be applied everywhere. So when I look at projects, and I have like 30 years of consulting project experience, almost obviously there are other reasons why projects fail, but a really big part is around requirements, is understanding what the client needs, which can be broken down into what they say they need and what they actually need that they don't articulate, or they're unable to articulate properly. And that's kind of like where all the challenges come, is when we think we know, we think we hear, and we build what we think they want or need. And then come UAT, it's a lot of, this wasn't what I imagined. When you said this, I thought it was going to be like this. I didn't realize it's going to be 28 clicks to get there, and so on and so forth. So just like a lot of conflict in life, I think it is really deeply about communication, about how people communicate or don't communicate what they actually need. So I am on the side of requirements actually being the reason why so many projects stumble and fail.
So this is potentially not just a process problem, but also a people problem and a communication problem, perhaps?
But yes, I would totally agree with that, Eric.
I have lived that experience many times before myself, where there's the cartoon that keeps coming to my mind, where somebody wanted to swing on the tree, and what the cartoon shows is what they asked for, which is the swing on the tree where you can actually use it, but what they got is the tree in the way of the swing. So something wasn't properly defined. I mean, your example of the gift for your partner is perfect, I think, because that really illustrates how simple things can go wrong.
100%.
So Pei, it's good to understand the problem, but how do we analyze the root cause? I mean, it could be a lot of different things. So for any audience members listening in today who might be living that today, maybe they're a BA and they're just an individual contributor, or maybe they're a project manager that is overseeing a project, what are some of those telltales that they should be thinking about to help proactively reduce these risks? But also, if they're experiencing it today, how can they begin to unwind that a bit more?
I think the root is a lack of listening, but people don't see it that way, and we don't listen for many reasons. So, for example, I might be on a project, and I might have an architect who's had loads of experience, bags of experience behind them. Usually means they think they know what the problem is when the customer begins to speak. And so there might be ego in place. There might be lots of things in place where I've seen this problem before. I know what you need. You need this. And through that process, your users, your stakeholders, your clients, they don't get heard. So if if I was the architect, the first thing I would need to realize is I'm not listening, and I need to just, put the me away, put the ego aside, and just really listening to the other person. What are they going through? So not just tell me your problem. It's a bit like the counselor or the therapy. Just tell me about what's going on in your world, not tell me what you need to make your world better, because sometimes they can't even tell you exactly what that looks like. They're not going to say, yes, I need Sales Cloud and I need this and this and this. I need Agentforce. Sometimes it's, I can't do my reports because it's everywhere, and it's everywhere because of these reasons, and it causes me pain, and it takes so much, it creates stress. So it's just stopping and just being a lot more aware of the fact that the root cause is actually you're not listening deep enough.
So I'm curious then if the question the consultant should be asking isn't necessarily tell me about your problems, but rather show me your problems.
That's even better, because I love that. In one of the things that consultants do less of nowadays is something that I used to absolutely love, which is DILOs, which is day in the life of. And you've got an end user, and basically what we do is we sit down next to them and we just watch them work. We watch them come in, log into multiple systems, having to copy and paste, having to retype, rekey in from a printed sheet, having to do all the sorts of things. And basically you're, they're showing you their world because sometimes they can't articulate it. So what's happened now is, for many reasons, one of which I believe is, the need to cut costs. We don't want to pay for your consultant to sit next to my contact center agent for a whole day or half a day. Why don't you just get into a room and let my agent tell you in half an hour what she actually does? So that's kind of what happened. And because of that, communication gets missed. The agent, while they're sitting next to you, will forget that they do this extra few steps on this particular edge case, and then requirements gets missed out. So you're absolutely right. In order to get a very clear picture, it is they should actually show us their world. If they're not able to articulate it, then that's the next best thing.
Yeah, Pei, I'm thinking of a project I was involved with in the last few years where, we had an on-site, and the primary folks that we were talking with were the managers and the directors, and we realized that we hit a wall of information, because unless you talk with the folks that are actually doing the work, those contact center staff, to understand their day in the life, their pain points, you're never going to uncover all those items, which ultimately helps influence what the future state looks like. So I think there's an element of that too, talking to the right people in that journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I got into the Salesforce world because I was in a contact center that was then going to implement Salesforce, and a conversation with the person who was above the management of the contact center. She saw something in me that decided I should be the person to help the contact center implement Salesforce. So I went from the end user to being the BA and the implementation person. And so I lived all of the problems we were then trying to solve. I didn't have to ask someone. I didn't have to say, show it to me, because I personally experienced it, which that's probably even better than sitting in a room and watching somebody do their job. But I remember very clearly, as part of my own transition through that process, I still sat down with other people on the team to see if they did something slightly different, or to see if they experienced something that I personally did not as a call center agent, because I knew everything that went on in that call center I wasn't seeing it all. So I had to experience the rest of it and figure out how all of that matched together properly to properly configure Sales Cloud and Service Cloud for our teams to use.
So Pei, let's take a step back, right? Before a project starts, typically you can have problems before kickoff. And oftentimes you have, in the consulting world, you have a pre-sales team that sold the deal, and then you have a team that has to now deliver what was promised. Curious to get your take on where does that, cause issues when it comes to discovery. One area that I come to mind, and I'll stop there, is clients will say, well, we already answered that question before, right? Why are you asking me the same questions again? Or they're asking open-ended questions when we might have some context. But we'd love to get your take on sales to delivery handoff, and where does that play a role in requirement gathering and understanding and building trust with the customer?
Oh, you've opened a can of worms here. That's not what I meant. Sorry. There's so many things I could say about this. I think first of all, it's a few things. One is alignment of goals. So you start with Salesforce, who want to sell licenses, and sometimes they sell licenses to organizations that may not really need Salesforce, or maybe something different. So, for example, the problem already started there. They needed something completely different, and they landed with Salesforce. So that's, right up in the upstream. And then you have the sales team who wants to sell the project, right? So that's their goal, and maybe to maximize their profit, their what's what I'm looking for, commission and things, the pay structure, right? And so that's their goal, to close the sale as quickly as possible. I mean, obviously not all partners do this, but a lot. And then they do enough so that they can scope a price, and sometimes without the kind of details that we need in delivery to ensure we can keep the promises that are made. So there's already a few things that makes the journey not very smooth already. So let's not talk about Salesforce, because it's not something that we can fix or solve. But from sales to delivery, my opinion, and I work with a lot of CEO of Salesforce practices, is that there needs to be an alignment of values and shared goals in, kind of like a profit sharing thing, so that everyone is going the right direction, which is, it maybe the goal isn't to sell the most the biggest profit. The goal is a high CSAT from the customer, or the goal might be repeat customer or lifetime value, whatever that might be. But it needs to be a lot more holistic. It needs to be owned by everybody. And when everyone can see the end goal, which is a very happy customer, with a high quality delivery, then everyone works towards that. So then you have the sales teams who make sure that they don't make assumptions that are incorrect, or that is purposely biased into the favor of the client signing the contract. And then you need a structured sales to delivery handover. So the ones that I run as the project manager of delivery, I usually say the handover is really important. I get my whole team onto an internal kickoff. Before that, I get them to read the whole statement of work. What have we sold? And I get them to print it out and redline everything. Which of this will keep you up at night if you were delivering this project? Those are my risks as a PM. And then I'll take that during internal kickoff, and we will actually interrogate the sales. Tell me more. Who was at the demo? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people there? Who are excited? Who are not excited? What did we actually promise? You said this in the statement of work, and now we're saying, that's not going to be possible. How did you see that happening in your, when you were putting this together? And basically gather as much intel as we can, so that when we walk into the project kickoff, we already know all the risks. Sometimes we make promises that we know this is not something that we can easily overcome. I have a difficult conversation I need to have, then I want to have it as soon as possible. I want to already know what we're going to do about that, and so on and so forth. So in the partners that I've worked with and that I've coached, I talk about this a lot. So that mitigates some of the things that you're talking about, which is, the client saying, oh, we've answered this question, or, why are you asking more? So it might, usually I will say, I'd love to hear it in your words, because I want to make sure that we haven't missed anything. Because sometimes during conversation, there are nuances. I've got a different experience than, your AE or salesperson. And, just my teams for our benefit. We want to get as much context so that we can build you the best system that we can. Usually they don't get upset and they'll tell us the whole story again and add more details and more layers that the sales team are likely not to have had, because they don't want to ask, they don't want to open the can. They just want it signed. They want a neat and nice solution that they can sell. So, but for us, we really need to know all the risks, all the unknowns as far as we can, so that we can prepare and so that we can have a smooth running project.
It's part of this conversation that you're describing right now, perhaps yes, I can see why that's important, but that's a phase 2 or a phase 3. Let's do this minimum viable product kind of thing first and get you up and running, and then everything else becomes an enhancement or an improvement.
100%. So as a project manager and during kickoff, I talk to them about the iron triangle, right? The relationship between resources, budget, timeline, and its effect on quality. So, this is a triangle that you can't move. You can try to move it, but quality is going to suffer. So if you want to add scope, something's got to change. So it'll be the resources and the timeline. You can't squeeze stuff in as quick as possible and things like that, because you'll pay for it. If not upfront with cash, it'll be later on when you have a PR disaster because a huge defect was public, and those. So I make it very, very clear. So commercial conversations are very easy for me, because I will bring them back to this iron triangle later on the line when I'm talking about it, and when they want to add more scope, or they add further level of detail that we think will add risk to the project. So I have all my difficult conversations up front that makes it easier later on down the road. And for sure, it'll be, that is absolutely right. I think it's a great addition, but maybe for a release 2 or phase 2, let's make sure that this is up and running and your users are super happy using it, and then we can build in enhancement, because I'm sure they're going to have more suggestions on how to further improve this. So let's make them happy first.
So for audience members that might be listening who are maybe experiencing a project that is less than ideal, it was sold incorrectly or something along those lines, what tangible advice can we give them to try to partner with the sales team? Or what have you told sales organizations in the past to from a collaborative standpoint to ensure that sales and delivery are speaking the same language? Because ideally you would capture these issues prematurely and not during the project. But if they do come up in the project, then that's where the power of the PM becomes so important to bring awareness sooner rather than later.
So the question is, are you talking about if...
Yeah, so if we have an audience member that maybe is a BA or architect or PM on a project that maybe wasn't sold correctly, and they want to share feedback internally on how do we make sure our sellers are selling properly, and there's proper governance and guardrails to ensure the SOW that doesn't have clauses that are problematic or scope that maybe doesn't make the most sense for where the customer is at currently, or maybe it's a little too ambiguous. But what kind of actionable items can they do to help own their destiny a little bit more?
So a lot of I get a lot of consultants asking me these questions, and so a lot of times they're put in a very difficult positions. And partners, for better or worse, just like legal firms, they make their money through selling our time, which is not the best way to do things. But it's an hourly rate, day rate, and things like that. In an organization, usually they try to maximize profits, and through that, sometimes behaviors are that's created is suboptimal. Like, for example, underselling and over promising, and then you get people who are caught in the middle, which is the delivery team. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, this is not right, and we've underestimated, etc. What should we do? Now, if it's a one-off, you escalate to the project manager. I am someone who will, as I mentioned, have the difficult conversation first. So I'll have the difficult conversation internally where I will say, hey, look, we messed up. We have sold something that we've sold the moon on a stick, but we can really only deliver, cheese on a string, something like that. So what can we do? What can we do? Okay, we sold a 200-day project for 100 days. I am not going to get my team to work that extra 100 on their weekends and evenings. That's just not on. So what can we do? So a couple of things. As a project manager, I have more authority to say and do things that I'm about to share with you, which is I go internally and I say, okay, we messed up, right? I know we signed a contract already, and there are a couple of things that you can do. We can go back to the customer, which is not great to say, hey, customer, it's actually going to take 200 days and not 100. That's bad already in so many ways. The alternative is, we swallow the 100-day, we write it off, but we do 200 days on the project because that's really what it's going to need to deliver all the things that we've promised. And so hopefully as an organization, we learn better, we estimate better, we ask questions like how many environments do you have? Because deployment takes time. A lot of people don't think about deployment time, right? They think it's only one-off, but maybe you got sandbox, you got QA, you got pre-prod, you have integration, you got SIT environment, you got so many, and they don't take into account the deployment time as an example. So first thing is escalate internally, make sure that organization learns from that mistake. So in future, you estimate better, you have lessons learned that you actually implement. But if the individual is working in an organization where this happens a lot, which means that it's a systemic issue, that means the leadership may not be very aligned with the value system of the different business units, then I will say to the individual is, does this environment still serve you? Are you learning? Or is it impacting your mental health, emotional health, physical health? What's the cost to you? If what you're gaining in terms of learning it's more valuable than the cost, then stick around until you learn that CPQ, you learn agent, whatever, and then you make that evaluation again. Because if escalating internally doesn't change the behavior, then you have a decision to make.
Yeah, leaning in on projects is not a long-term strategy. I hear that all the time where, folks are asked, hey, please lean in on this one or two project. This one is a fire drill. So that's not, how employees should be treated. And I'm completely aligned with you there. I mean, it's not ideal.
I'm reminded of a little bit from a project I worked on many years ago, where the scope seemed to keep changing. And the question that I kept asking when those conversations were happening were, yes, I can do that, but instead of what? So you want me to do this, but I'm going to have to remove something else from the original scope to keep everything properly on schedule and under budget and all those kinds of things. And that was not an easy conversation either, because they want everything, right?
I tell people, I say, so I'm Malaysian Chinese, right? So my husband feels very cringy when we go shopping, and I'm asking for a discount. You don't do that in England, but sometimes when I ask for a discount, I get it, and sometimes I don't, which is fine. But we are all human beings, and we all kind of want, if we can get away with a discount, why not? All right. So that's the same with as a customer as well. If they can ask for more and get it, why not? It's just really human. And I tell my team, don't get upset. It's a human behavior. People will ask for more. It is our job as the trusted advisor to say, yes, you can have it, instead of what? Just like what you were saying, Eric, instead of what else you want to drop from this so that you can have it and not get upset. So a lot of consultants get really upset. Why the customer is so demanding? We are human. We will be demanding, So sorry, just needed to add that.
So, Pei, I do have one question for you, though. How do you balance between being a good consultant versus an order taker, but also holding the line of, what you're responsible for delivering? Basically, what I mean here by this is some consultants will just take the information at face value and just run with it. And yeah, this is what we designed. This is what we're going to go with, versus the critical thinking. That's why companies hire consultants, because they've experienced a lot. They know the industry ins and outs, the use case ins and outs. So they're able to critically push back in a thoughtful manner. But sometimes that can be construed as well, we're trying to push you down a certain direction. So is there a good secret sauce that folks can potentially lean on, and how can they be more methodical with how they share feedback with customers and not maybe appear as combative or pushing back too much?
I feel like there's quite a few questions or threads in that. So for me as a PM, we have so many pressures, and to keep the customer happy, they want it under budget, all the scope that they want. And you've got your company who hired you, who want you to make as much money out of change requests as possible. And you have your team who wants to have a rewarding project to work on and not kind of like get too stressed out in the process. So sometimes you can't have it all. And that's the balance that a project manager has to take. For me, it is understanding my personal values, and sometimes it is not in line with the organizational value. So my value is human beings are human beings, and they need to be treated kindly. And in order to treat them kindly, you need to give them what fills their soul. And what fills their soul might be rewarding work without drama, without stress. And it might be working partnership with the vendor who understands your pain and will give you what you need, and be honest and authentic with you. So when I think about it that way, and I always put human beings at the center of all my decisions, I don't have very many dilemmas. But maybe I'm speaking from a position of privilege, in that I know if I lose this job, I can go and get another job, right? So I have the privilege that I can stand, true to my values and tell the company, this is not the way to do things, or I think you're shortchanging the client here, you're lowballing it, and then you're going to do something else which is not what is in my values. I would be pretty vocal, mainly because I love my sleep and I don't like anything that messes it, which is, making a decision that will weigh on my conscience. So for me, making decisions and having those difficult conversations up front is much easier and better than waiting for it to fester and blow up in my face.
So how do you feel like things have shifted a little bit? I mean, your conversation and your focus seems to be very human-centered, which is fantastic. But we as an industry, we seem to be moving more towards AI. So with that shift towards almost becoming an AI first, perhaps, world, what's that do from the human side of things? How do you keep the human in the loop, should I say, and try to keep everyone satisfied, and maybe even taking that one step further, what additional skills do you as a consultant perhaps need to have because of that interaction?
I think that focusing on human connection is even more important now. I was just having a conversation with someone who said, oh, now with AI, we don't need business analysts anymore. I can get the AI to write my user stories, my acceptance criteria, and my test cases, and do them. I said, yes, but who's going to be doing the asking and the listening? And again, eliciting the right requirements and listening to what's being said, what's not being said, and the non-verbals and the emotional intelligence to actually peel back the layers in a way that doesn't get the other person to feel defensive and therefore, put the blocker up. How? Is AI going to do that? Maybe at some point, but until that day comes, there is a big gap. I think right now already people are not listening as deeply as they should. And so I think there is a place, actually it's even more critical for the human being to be a big part of AI. And I was having another conversation about this. I don't think AI is going to replace everything. I think it will do a lot of things, which means that we can focus on the deeper human connections, the communication, the understanding, so that when we get the right requirement, we can build the right thing. I don't, did I answer your question, or did I go off on a tangent?
No, I think that was perfect, actually. I'm not sure I had a specific direction in mind when I posed that question, other than to just to get some more conversation perhaps sparked, or some curiosity sparked by our listeners, where they're starting to think about, we want to use AI, but how do we do it properly? Or what does proper use look like for them? And what are some of the things that they might need to consider before they start to implement some AI tools?
The
Yeah.
human being it will never go away. Sorry, Omar.
Pei, I've had conversations at some of the Dreaming events this year, and some of the themes I've heard is there's fear, and I think it's rightfully so. There's a transition happening, and people are fearful of what they don't know, and it seems like AI is inevitable in a lot of different industries, not just our industry. Have you started to have those conversations with organizations that you're working with? Like, I think everybody's trying to figure it out, but how do people, put the fear aside, or maybe, channel that in a way that maybe they can, make it beneficial for them, and hopefully learn a few skills, and, become an AI consultant, or somebody that knows how to use AI and be more efficient? I'm just curious, is that something that you've had conversations on today?
All the time. This is a current topic. Fear comes from comes from a place of loss. You're going to lose something. You're going to lose your relevance. You're going to lose the control you have over things. And it's an age-old question. When the sewing machine came, all the seamstress all had the same feeling about their livelihoods being taken away. It's inevitable. The evolution and revolution happens, and either we adapt or we kind of lose out in this space, right? Because there will be some things that AI will not take, like a physiotherapist, for example. Their job will never go away, but unless you belong to the group of people who work more with their hands than with skill and knowledge workers like we are going to have to adapt and to understand how it's a tool like everything else. So I was listening to a talk by Angela Duckworth, who talks about grit. She's the grit researcher, and she basically says that how do you look at AI? Do you look at it as a crutch or as a coach? Are you looking at it to help you in replacing your thinking, or help you in making your thinking a sharper tool for you to use? So there'll be two pools of people when I'm talking to those who are worried. I said, do you want to be in group A or group B? Because those are your choices, unless you belong to the people that AI won't be replacing. Like I said, a physio or a nurse or that sort of thing. Then that's a choice you have to make, and it's being mindful of the choices, because if you are not intentional and you just go with the flow, you will end up losing out. So if you're so scared that you put your head in the sand, you don't know anything about AI, you will lose out whether you like it or not. So why don't you think about it now and intentionally decide if you want to be in group A? Then you will forever be an order taker. You will go and you go to ChatGPT and say, what do I do when this situation comes up? And then do what it tells you to. Or you'll be in group B that says, this situation has come up. I thought of options 1, 2, and 3. What's the pros and cons? If you took on the persona of a business leader, what are the pros and cons? If you took on the persona of this other person I admire, what is that is a difference in sharpening your thinking skill using AI. Which group do you want to be? So I have that conversation all the time, and so it's up to the person I'm speaking to. Sometimes it's a consultant, sometimes it's an admin, to kind of decide, oh, well, it is scary, but let me go and take the Agentforce trailhead, and just learn a little bit more about ethics, about the underlying scary thing. Maybe if I know more, it won't be as scary as I thought it was.
Interesting. So that brings up
Go ahead.
one really interesting, potentially interesting and question for you. If someone came to you today and said, "I want to become a consultant," what's the one thing that you probably would tell them that's something they need to know or they need to learn or they need to be aware of? What's that one top thing that you would probably recommend that they understand?
They want, say, if they're an admin and they wanted to be a consultant. Okay, that's an easy one for me to say. I think it goes back to communication, but being able to have difficult conversations with whoever it is, the clients, being able to say no. And a lot of people now, with COVID making hybrid working easy, you can turn your camera off when you don't want to confront somebody, when you don't want to have difficult conversations. You can block them. You can, which makes it easier to avoid. But problems don't go away. And a consultant, a really good one, has the skill to give difficult conversations without alienating the other person. So I think it boils down to communication skill. It's not tech skill. The tech skill you can learn anytime, anywhere. You've got Trailhead. But the communication skills, the people skills, and what's worrying me now is with the hybrid situation, with the virtual situation, the young people who's coming up. When I was growing up, it feels like such a long time ago. You shadow people, you watch, you learn, you make mistakes, and you have someone saying, "Hey, you did that wrong." It's more difficult online, and people are more afraid of reaching out, and therefore they're not learning or growing because they're so afraid of offending their peers, their seniors, or burdening them or things. But it right now, to be a consultant or even just to be successful in any role as you are coming up as a junior talent, is the ability to put yourself out there and say, "Hey, Eric, the other day you showed me this flow. I can't get it to work. I followed all your steps. I can't get it. Is there something wrong with me, or something wrong with my instructions or my environment? Can you help me out?" That a lot of people can't do that, especially the newer, younger ones, because it's so easy to just some block or delete or mute an uncomfortable situation. So just to advance, I think that's the one skill. If you can master it, you can. They say you can. You realize that every problem is figure outable.
So it feels like communication is a mix of listening and empathy and emotional intelligence. One of the things that when we chatted before, you mentioned your volunteering and the work that you do with Samaritan's listeners, and work that you've been doing now, I believe, over a decade, has helped shape some of your thoughts and methodology. We'd just love to learn a little bit more about what you've done and what takeaways could you share with our audience?
So Samaritans is a crisis phone line in the UK. And we believe in something called self-determination. That means whatever the caller decides, we don't try to change their minds. But by actively listening empathetically and being present and just exploring everything, a lot of times they will realize that there are options rather than this particular one in front of them. And therefore they, end the call with like, "I'm going to try some of these other options." So a couple of rules, like two. So I also train the volunteers in my branch, and they're always, one of the things that they always say to me is, "I'm so worried I will say the wrong thing." And you can apply that to real life in conversations and communication with your loved one, your family, your team, when we're talking about conflict. So the two things I say, if you can remember these two things, you will never say the wrong thing. Okay, the first one is you don't try and solve their problems. You don't. Just because you went through the exact same thing doesn't mean that it will work for this person in their context. So we don't solve the problem. Second, we don't assume anything. We don't make any assumptions. So it's just that two rules. If you can remember that, you'll never say the wrong thing. And So that means that every week when I'm on shift, I get to practice listening non-verbal cues on the phone. And if I break any of these rules, even accidentally, my caller will let me know by hanging up. And I'll think, oh, I did do something wrong. And it almost always falls into one of these two categories. And it might be me saying, really? So just that word can have judgmental overtones, which I may not have been aware of, but the caller has heard it. And so they hang up, right? So these two things, I would say, because because we have to listen without judgment to all our callers who are calling about all sorts of things that's going on in their lives, and whether I agree with their outlook or not, I don't judge. And that gives me a lot of perspective on other people's lives. Like if you're reading a comic book and you see a character with the thought bubbles, but the thing with thought bubbles is no one else knows what they're thinking. It's just in their head. And my volunteering means I am privy to those thought bubbles because they can tell me. They can say things like, my sibling really vexes me so much, I want to push them downstairs. Just something that you wouldn't say out to anyone else, but they can say to me. So which means that I know many people have battles that they're fighting every day, substance abuse or trauma or grief or loss or breakup, that they don't tell anyone else. But it presents itself sometimes in different ways. And so because of that, I can say almost infinite patience with people, because I know. And then with enough time, with enough empathy, they will tell me what's going on in their world. And when they do, then doors will open. I can find ways to help them, and that's how I create rapport with my team and with my client, because everyone's got problems. And if you're patient enough to listen, to be there for them, and don't judge them, don't tell them how to fix it, they will usually open up. And that makes a world of difference, which is why I can say when I started my volunteering services about 17 years ago, all my projects started to get really boring. So when I say really boring, I mean, there's very little drama, because we just cut through the chase. And when someone says, how are you doing? And I go, I'm fine. And I said, no, really, how are you doing? Because, your body language doesn't tell me fine. And then when you're able to say things like that, they'll say, actually, I had a really bad phone call this morning from, my aunt or uncle, and I had bad news. And when you understand they had bad news, you give them more slack. We help each other more, and the project just, there's no upsetness or anger, no fluffiness, that irrelevance. We understand each other, and I can just say, it's a time of the month for me, I'm going to be really crabby, tell me when I cross the line, and my team will, they will tell me. And so it just makes things easier. No games. There's no games in my projects. It's just so easy. Let's just solve the business problem, the tech problem, and the people problem just kind of melts away, because we don't play games. Because tell me what's happening, what's going on, and let's solve it together.
Fantastic. That sounds to me almost like a really great way to wrap up this podcast right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'll share one thing that resonated from that last piece, Pei. Oftentimes I see people get caught up with the emotional, like how somebody's tone is in email or a message, when there's more to it than just ... or may accidentally put an all cap word by mistake. And what it takes is, hey, let's just clarify, clear the air. Because that could create tension within project teams, within clients and project teams, and that definitely goes becomes an issue, or could become an issue downstream on the project. So with that, our time is coming up to an end here. Pei, really, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of these invaluable insights and experiences that you've gone through I personally have learned a few things today, and I've been in the ecosystem for a decade. And just it's always good to be getting a refresher in a lot of these in a lot of ways. So for folks that have tuned in on the podcast today, hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. And please follow the Beyond the Org podcast so you don't miss any future deep dives with our future guests. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.